60 knots.
Check.
V1, rotate.
Are the mics on?
The mics are on.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Blue Skies podcast. We are your hosts, Aryan and Trisha. Thank you, Ginger and Claire, today for joining us. This is definitely an exciting episode since you both are such stellar role models in this industry. You both currently are in leadership positions in flight operations at Porter. And that's a prime example of what Northern Lights stands for and what we try to strive to instill in some of the junior achievers out there. For those who may not know, Claire is a former Elsie 2015 recipient of the Rising Star Award. And Ginger, congratulations on your role at Porter with being chief pilot. So again, thank you both for joining us. And we'd like to start by having you introduce yourselves. Where did you complete your flight training and how did you find yourself at Porter?
So, hi, thanks for having us. My name is Ginger Farrah. I completed my flight training at Moncton Flight College. I started in 2004, completed in 2006. At the same time as doing my diploma program at MFC, I was also doing the Class 4 flight instructor program, which I feel is pretty typical for a lot of us in our first jobs. So I flight instructed at MFC as well. I worked at the Moncton campus for the first year of instructing, and then I was really fortunate because Moncton really expanded their teaching programs, and I was one of the first groups of people, I was in the first group of people to go to the Fredericton campus when they opened up essentially a second portion of their school. So I instructed for essentially 5 years, and then I was really looking for a new challenge. I wanted to fly something bigger, faster, things like that. And I went on to work at Thunder Airlines. I joined Thunder as a first officer flying a King Air 100 in their Thunder Bay base. And then after a very short period of time, maybe 8-9 months, I was upgraded to captain there. It meant that I also had to move to Timmins. That's where the captain role was available. And I stayed there until essentially through to the full end of 2013. In early 2014, January 2014, I joined Porter, and I've been at Porter ever since. Joined Porter as a first officer and upgraded to captain and stayed being a line captain for a long time, actually. Didn't really do anything else a whole lot outside of that. Maybe a little bit of project work, but that was pretty much it. And then in the more recent years, I became a trainer and then took an acting role in management, then a permanent role in management, and now here we are today, chief pilot of the Dash A400. So that's sort of my background in aviation.
Mm-hmm. For me, my journey in aviation, I think with a lot of pilots, is just about being around airplanes and staying as close to the flight deck as possible, but it's happened in a couple different ways for me. I started flight training at the Brampton Flying Club for my private pilot license, and then moved out west to Coastal Pacific Aviation in Abbotsford for my commercial multi-engine ratings. As I said, did whatever I could to stay around airplanes. So in the summers, I dispatched at my flight school. I was a rampy in Vancouver, the international airport there. I flew skydivers one summer up to 12,000 feet just so they could jump out of a perfectly good airplane, right? And then a really formative experience for me was a summer job I had at Bombardier Aerospace the year before I graduated. That was in their flight test engineering department on the Q series, actually. And so that experience turned into a full-time role after I graduated. It gave me this really full picture of what the Dash 8 is all about, right? Different systems, avionics, electrical, hydromechanical systems. And then, as I said, in flight test. And so not just about how the airplane flies, but everything that kind of goes into the airplane beyond that. I eventually then moved to Montreal to fly Bombardier's corporate shuttle. It was also Dash 8. So my careers really revolved around that airplane. And then joined Porter as a first officer in 2016. It's been really amazing so far. I've had the privilege of serving as an assistant chief pilot, and I also got to work with our crews as a training captain and more recently an approved check pilot.
Well, congratulations to both of you. You both had differing journeys to get you, but you guys made it together at the end.
So that role at Bombardier, was that like a summer internship that you had done while you were a student?
Yeah, I was a summer student there. Yeah, and I was basically doing summer student type things like organizing their document library and, taking inventory and that kind of thing. But it was like a 3-week long interview, basically. It was a time like financial crisis was when I was graduating. There weren't many pilot jobs and they were like, you want to come back? And then, yeah. I thought I'd be there for like a year or two, and I was there for 7.5 years because I just love the work so much. So
I think one of the coolest things I've learned about Claire years ago was this exact, like, her sort of trajectory and how getting to Porter. Because when I think about it, you think, oh yeah, she worked in Bombardier. And then I'm like, no. You worked at Bombardier, like, essentially as a first job, did that, and then came to an airline flying the same aircraft type. But I just find it incredible when I think, like, the level of depth, the knowledge that you have on the aircraft is, anyway, it's impressive. And it's very unique. This is not a typical career path. Yeah, it's an interesting part learning about your history there, Claire. Yeah.
Do you enjoy learning all the different technical aspects and the things behind the scenes into what makes the Dash 8? Is that very interesting to you? Kind of like an engineering mindset.
Yeah, that's it. I'm not an engineer myself, but I spent a lot of time with engineers and like testing different aircraft parts, doing like all experimental kind of things, everything from hardware and software upgrades. The plane was already about 10 years old by the time I started working on it, to like things like customer requests for increased capabilities. So the aircraft was originally designed to land on a runway with slopes up to 2%, but there was an airline in Papua New Guinea that had a runway they wanted to fly to had a 3% slope. So we went to Papua New Guinea and tested the aircraft on that runway. And then later there was an airline in the Philippines. They were like, well, we have this airport that's on like the side of a dormant volcano and it's like more than 4% runway slope. So we went, okay, we'll go test that there too. And it was just like really interesting things to see like the capability of the aircraft.
That's really cool. That's a fun experience, it seems like.
And then Ginger, you mentioned you flight instructed, and then you kind of did a little up north cowboy style flying, cowgirl style flying. What was that like? Did you prefer one or the other?
I've always thought that I've enjoyed everything that I've done, but I've enjoyed the next thing even more than the previous thing. Does that make sense? When I became an instructor, I wasn't really sure if I was going to really like that at all. It was at the time very limited career-wise on sort of what was available out there for low-time pilot jobs, and I thought, okay, I'll give this a try. It seems reasonable. I liked the flight college. They were really, really good. I had a great experience with them as a student, so I thought, okay, I can try that from that perspective. But I really enjoyed training way more than I thought I was going to like it, especially when I got into teaching for the majority of my time at Moncton Flight College, I instructed almost exclusively on the multi-engine and the Seminole. And I loved teaching multi, IFR, in our King Air Sim, teaching the IFR courses, teaching the ATPL courses. Those were particularly interesting to me. So it was really easy to let 5 years go by as an instructor because of how much I actually enjoyed it. It wasn't, at a certain point, it wasn't just like, oh, this is the only job out there. I just really liked it. When it was time to move on and, go fly up north, Thunder Airlines, they still are a medevac and charter company. I worked on the charter portion of it, and also they run sched routes as well. What I loved about it was finally a time to get to fly an actual King Air, because I'd been teaching how to fly the King Air Sim at Moncton for years at that point. So it was really great to finally get in an actual King Air, a thing that I felt like a heavy connection to just through all of this training time. So that was like a particularly cool moment in the career, being able to actually fly the plane. But I also really liked the real world IFR aspect of it. I'd been teaching IFR for so long. I don't know, it was just nice to have like certain things connected and to make it all make sense in a real world scenario. However, flying for, northern operators, it's very challenging. The weather is challenging. Approaches, I mean, especially when I was there, I'm to understand that like in certain of those stations, they've made great strides to having like some really good RNAV approaches into some places. But just to give context, when I was there, all the places we were regularly going to, They got their first RNAV approach within the last month of my working there.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So it's like NDBs before that?
NDB only approaches. And your IFR without center, because you're like working north of the certain area, like you're getting your clearances via phone. It's just a very different world. And yes, they had a dispatch, but it's not the type of dispatch that you would, expect at, let's say, an airline like ours. So you are making a lot of decisions with your group, whoever is your charter, or if you're doing the sched run, like, you're making a lot of decisions on your own. So it really, really pushed me to have to develop the skill of decision making, because you just don't have the deep resources that you would have or expect at, let's say, an airline. So from that end, I think I probably did the most learning in that job. And it certainly prepared me for coming into an airline like Porter. I just felt very prepared going into it from a decision-making standpoint. What I did not feel prepared for going into Porter was everything that I wasn't used to, which is that type A dispatch, working with ground crews. We never had that. Working with customer service representatives. Never had that. Like what a full operation looks like when you're doing proper like de-icing procedures. You don't have that when you're up north. You do a lot of that work yourself. So yeah, there was aspects of it. Oh, a busy controlled airspace. Yeah, didn't really have that. So there was definitely like other challenges I needed to focus on when going to Porter. But yeah, when I look back, I always think, yeah, I liked the next thing better than the previous thing. Having said that, Claire and I were just talking about this in the car ride here, and coming to Porter, I think the first thing I realized was like, even though you're doing a lot of work, you're just like, wow, this job is a little bit easier than my last job. It's hard not to notice that difference. Yeah, going from your charter medevac operations to an airline is like a 705 is, yeah, you notice.
You notice there's more like established processes and
absolutely. And support. There's a ton of established like support procedures behind the scenes should you need resources.
So why did you decide to join Thunder instead of just continuing your training, your flight training? And did you feel like you needed to go to Thunder to be prepared for an airline?
At the time, you needed like a straight up hours requirement. Airlines like Porter, I mean, eventually what would be Encore, definitely Jazz, they wouldn't even look at you unless you had multi-pick turbine time. Here's a fun story. In my initial class at Porter, which, by the way, Elizabeth Mitch's was in my initial class at Porter. We started at the same time. That was one of the first classes that they'd had where Porter had hired people with Pilatus time, so single engine turbine time. They thought that was kind of a revolutionary move, taking people with single engine turbine time. It was simply just what was going on in the industry at the time. When I joined Porter, I had somewhere around 5,500 hours total time, 2,000-ish, most of that pick time on the King Air, a ton of other pick time coming from instructing. And that was sort of an average. That's not even really high time, I would say. That was like very, very average. So it was a requirement, really. Joined Porter, so we did all the interview process in 2013. It was just sort of where the industry was at.
A lot's changed since then.
Yeah.
Seems like now the industry needs pilots a lot more, so the requirement is going down.
Yeah, it has changed. Even changed over the last 5 years.
What are your personal thoughts upon that? We've always been kind of curious that, the requirement's going down, but does that affect anything in the airlines?
It does. I think it's overall positive. The reason I think it's generally positive is that people have come to our airline, as new first officers, and irrespective of the type of, experience that they bring, everybody is coming to the table, first of all, willing to put in the work. But it's actually some of our lower time pilots that have come with some very interesting skills and have been super valuable, kind of to that initial training process. We've found that some of our very low time initial hires have come and they have these really excellent like study habits. That's not necessarily a thing that somebody with very, very high time has really had to focus on. It might be a skill that comes a little bit easier to them, or they sort of fall back on the understanding of like, oh, it's okay, I've got thousands of hours experience, I've been a captain before, doesn't really matter. Whereas your person coming in who's only been an instructor, maybe only has 1,000 hours, they're going, okay, I need to make up for this somehow. And because of that, they've developed these amazing study habits. So it's been a thing that we've noticed. Having said that, the flip side of that is that I think all airlines really, and Porter's included in that, but we really changed the way that we do initial training now and our captain upgrade training to really tailor for the fact and compensate for the fact that the experience level has changed. Again, it's one of those, it's a necessity, it's a requirement just based on what is happening right now in the industry.
I think it's always great when you have a real diversity of experience in an initial class. So you have those higher time pilots with different experience types, either flying up north or flying overseas or something, and paired with, you know, people who have most of their experience instructing or like small single engine operations. Yeah. And to be able to have that balance in a class, then they're able to share their different experiences and really help each other in that training process. And I think that kind of diversity of experience benefits everyone.
That is a really cool point. Like the fact that you could have an instructor and someone that worked up north and they both come with like their own experiences. That one of my follow-up questions for you, Ginger, was you mentioned being in Thunder Bay and those certain moments where it's tough decisions that you need to make and the decision-making process. Do you think that your experience as an instructor previously helped with those moments?
Definitely being an instructor going to work in Northern Ontario like I did, I think it helped me develop some good airmanship practices when you're in the plane and when you're presented with a challenge. I think because all of those years as instructing, you're always coming up with these unique scenarios and, you know, emergencies, abnormal scenarios to give your students. So there's a lot that you've already been thinking about over the years. But what it had done is I had developed my own personal way of going through, okay, what's the problem? What's the information at hand? Do we have any memory items? No. Do we have any other checklists to support? Okay, who do we need to contact, right? And actually that process for, you know, going through an emergency or an abnormal is not dissimilar or really that materially different from how we at an airline would go through, let's say, an engine failure, right? But I really do think that being an instructor first kind of helped me develop those sort of personal strategies for how you go about doing that when you don't necessarily have, let's say, like a super, super robust SOP to fall back on like you would at an airline. Yeah. Up north, like, you know, for Thunder and a bunch of other operators up north, they of course have SOPs, but they're not to the same extent that you would expect to see at like
705s and
705s. Yeah, it's a different type of world, but I definitely feel grateful for having all those years instructing. You're constantly coming up with weird scenarios to give your students. So, and sometimes those things happen in real life, medicals and failures and technical issues and weather issues. Those were a big thing. So. Yeah.
And then, Claire, with you, what was that like stepping into now a test pilot role with that being your first job? Yes, you were accustomed to Bombardier's procedures and how they operated because you had that internship, but were you ever scared at some point that this is your first job?
Well, I started as like a flight test, like an engineering technologist. And so really kind of sitting in the jump seat for running these tests. And yeah, like that's when you're dealing with experimental aircraft parts, there's always some level of risk there, but it's mitigated risk, right? And we always talk about like crawl, walk, run, right? So we'll test something, do a functional test in the hangar first, and then we'll do a ground test, and then we'll do a flight test, right? And you're mitigating that risk that way. The biggest thing I learned from working in that environment, the chief engineering test pilot would always say there's no room for haste in flight test. I mean, not rushing, right? Because that's how mistakes happen. And really, that's something I've brought with me in all the flying that I've done since then. And it's something that when I'm talking with some of our line pilots, I'm also trying to instill in them that we talk about real and perceived pressures, right? Operational pressures, and how that can affect our performance, right? If you think that you need to do something and you need to do it quickly, and then you start kind of working yourself up to do that, and then because of that haste and that perceived pressure, you make a mistake, you kind of look back and be like, well, if I had just taken some time and taken a deep breath before I kind of launched into this action plan, you know, maybe I would have done it differently. So that's the kind of thing that we try to see how we can learn from those experiences along the way.
It's interesting because I guess as you go into multi-engine, you have 2 engines. So it does kind of slow things down a little. Like you have a little more time to process. But we're really built into this or molded into this student where it's like, yeah, things need to go fast and you need to make a decision right on the spot. And it's a good point that you make, I guess, in your situation.
Yeah, there's a few times where definitely time is of the essence, right? Engine fire scenarios would be one of them. Anything with, yeah. But often, like take a hydraulic failure, for example, right? While you're in the air, that is not an emergency in the sense of like, we need to get down as soon as possible. You have time to think, to plan, because really where the risk comes in is on the landing, right? Because you're looking at like a longer landing distance or, just lots of systems that would help you slow down the aircraft. So the more planning you can do before that, the more that risk is mitigated down the road.
Yeah, so during your time at Bombardier, did you happen to face a lot of situations that were unexpected or emergencies or failures, malfunctions that you had to deal with?
Not so much on the emergency side of things, again, because of that kind of philosophy of the crawl, walk, run, right? We kind of like do things in incremental steps. We did have tests that didn't pass the first time. It sounds kind of silly, but one of them was with regards to the clock. We moved from an analog clock to a digital clock, and I remember we were doing a brightness test, like in the hangar, had everything, all the windows blacked out, and the chief pilot was like, "That clock is way too bright." I'm like, and he's like, "It needs to be replaced before we like certify it." And it was because it was so distracting, this really bright screen that didn't match the rest of the avionics, right? And you can understand how that would be distracting, right? But it just seems like this kind of niche area of concern. But that was our job, to make sure that everything worked before it went into production, right? So
I feel like I have to interject here and share something that Claire said very recently to me when we were at FOSC for the most recent FOSC for de Havilland. This usually gets brought up in the sense of like emergencies and abnormal situations. And somebody said, well, there was a comment to something and somebody said, well, you shouldn't really be doing that because now you're just like a test pilot and you're doing things that are, Claire already knows what I'm going to say, that are sort of against the book. And Claire did to me, she's like, test pilots would never do that. She's like, that's even more inaccurate because test piloting is like, it's very methodical and very process and procedure driven.
It is. Yeah, I think there's this kind of idea out there that it's just kind of like wild, do whatever you want. And that's the furthest from the truth.
So interesting hearing both your stories, different, but again, it brought you to the same place at the end.
Like, this was all impromptu. We were just so fascinated with all your stories. We haven't even gotten into the questions yet.
I find aviation to be such a niche industry itself because you both go your separate ways, learn different things that kind of help you go through your situations. Then when you go to Porter, you pass on these values to the next pilots coming in. And each other person who has their own separate experience will pass on those values. And then everyone kind of comes to, it's so interesting.
So, Ginger, you mentioned Elizabeth, and for listeners that don't know, Elizabeth assumed the role of chief pilot at Porter Airlines, where she led flight operations. And under her leadership, Porter did achieve some gender parity, especially in leadership roles on the Dash 8 team. And she was also last year the Elsie Award recipient in the flight ops category. So we kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about leadership at Porter. You both have worked closely under Elizabeth's leadership at the company. What was that experience like, and how did her leadership style influence the two of you and being assistant chief pilots and where you guys are now?
I'll just start off by saying that Liz is an incredible planner, both from the perspective of leading the flight ops department on the Dash 8 and from succession planning as well. It's very much one of her strong suits. Liz is always looking to promote from within and develop new skills and things for her fellow colleagues. And this is everything from, from even just from the line pilot perspective, she is one of the biggest proponent of like trying to get our pilots to upgrade from first officer to captain and getting those captains to upgrade to a trainer and then getting trainers to upgrade to ACPs or LCPs. So it's just a big part of her leadership style. With me specifically, she encouraged me to become a trainer, to become a manager on duty before I was actually a manager, to officially be a manager in an acting role. Then she encouraged me to be a manager permanently. Then the encouragement was there to, take over chief pilot. So she's been a huge influence in that. She's very open about sharing as a leader, and that you're only as strong as your whole team. So that's why succession and that whole building skills and collaboration is such a huge thing for her, because it's not an individual race. It's very much a team project. I definitely feel that her leadership style has very much influenced how I'd like to go into it. I hope that I'm carrying that forward, and I think our whole team echoes those skills and things. Liz is a huge proponent of there is no challenge too great to solve. Okay. I personally watched her tackle some very, very challenging events from the time that I got into management and, putting this whole thing in action, and, taking her planning skills and just the way that she is very, very process driven and, helps develop that process driven mentality in the rest of the team. It's a thing that she's just really excellent at. Organization is really key. The thing that I wanted to share with you from that perspective is that in her former office, my current office, there is a whiteboard on the wall, and her and I have a bit of a joke between each other, and sort of shared this with the whole flight ops management team. We call this the board of insurmountable problems. And the reason that we call it this is that if we're faced with this incredible project or incredible task that seems initially like it might be an insurmountable problem, and I am using air quotes in that, is that we put it up on the whiteboard. That's the first step. And then we'll start chipping away at it, and we'll figure out a way step by step to process it out. How are we going to solve this? And because really the whole sentiment behind that is that there actually isn't anything that is an insurmountable problem. That just sums up Liz and her entire attitude and her leadership style.
And do attitude.
Exactly.
Wow. How long have you guys worked together with Elizabeth?
I started with Liz in my initial class at Porter, so that's going into 12 years. But I joined the leadership team in 2023.
Yeah, for me it was 2021. It's about 4 years now. Mm-hmm.
And do you share similar experiences as well?
Yeah, something I really appreciate about Liz is, and what really defines my experience of working with her, is that she sees potential in people. Like Ginger, I think, alluded to that a little bit in terms of encouraging, our team members to apply for different roles, but seeing that potential even when the person doesn't see it in themselves. She hired me as an assistant chief pilot right as the airline was emerging out of the pandemic. We were both new in our roles, facing this monumental task of bringing 300 pilots back online while simultaneously preparing for the biggest expansion in Porter's history with the new Embraer jets. So something that would go up on the board of insurmountable problems, I would think. So navigating that high pressure environment under her leadership taught me so much, and her approach deeply influenced my own. So there's a few key lessons that I think have really stuck with me. The one, and I think Ginger mentioned this also, is to be solution oriented, right? Liz cultivates a culture where you don't just present a problem, you're encouraged to bring a potential solution to the table as well. And it creates a really proactive and empowered team. The second is to focus on steady incremental changes and progress. So in the face of massive change, it would have been easy to get overwhelmed with something like that, right? But she's brilliant at reminding us that we can't change everything at once. We focused on making things 1% better day after day, and developing and refining processes as we grew. And that over time, then you see that kind of bigger change happen through those incremental steps. Perhaps I think the most important is to lead with humanity. And by that, I mean, like, even in stressful moments, she would come and take time to check in with a simple, caring, like, how are you? And that small gesture reminds you that she's there to support you, not just as a manager, but as a mentor and friend too. So now when I lead our team members, that's the blueprint that I try to follow, to be solution focused, to aim for steady progress, and to never forget that human connection. I'm incredibly grateful to have a leader like her to learn from.
Oh, wow. That's such a sweet message. Is the Board of Insurmountable Problems still up?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a particularly large project on the Board of Insurmountable Problems right now as we speak. It's it's like very technical in nature, this thing that we're doing. It's a change management thing. And yeah, change management is really tough. But I just think that starting with Liz, but with our whole team, we all have these skills to be able to collaborate and come together and tackle it in this like very methodical, process driven way. And we're getting through it.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you both had such positive experiences under her leadership, and it's definitely shaped who you both are as leaders. Can we talk a little bit more about the management styles of leaders that you've worked under, especially when contrasting male versus female, getting into that? It could have been potentially before Elizabeth, so at other points in your career. And how did that leadership structure at Porter under a female with Elizabeth or whoever else differ? And what's that like?
It's a really interesting question. The question kind of makes me reflect back on my whole career in aviation. It spans over 20 years. And when I'm thinking back on this, I'm actually realizing how incredibly lucky I am, because at quite literally every company I've worked at, I've worked with female leaders. Not necessarily something that everybody can say in aviation, especially pilot managers as well. It's female pilots there's a narrow percentage, and then leaders are even narrower from there. So I'm just sitting here realizing that I am actually lucky and probably a little bit outside of maybe the norm. Having said that, I think that just irrespective of gender, there's just some really great qualities that a number of leaders that I've worked with have possessed. And I think those are the things that kind of come together and make this really excellent person. And they're things that you want to focus on. And they're things that I try to focus on in a leadership role. So taking a balanced approach to people, projects, and challenges. So to realize that there's different ways to do things, there's different ways to approach a project or a task or a challenge, and to be open to actually listening to those things. And really, like, the crux of that is putting your ego aside and letting someone else make a suggestion and realizing, hey, that's really great and I want to adopt this. Another thing that I think that we're really big on at Porter in general is taking accountability. So as a leader, not only do you take accountability for your actions, for the things that you do, for the policies that you put out, and for everything that you're trying to get, but you also hold other people accountable for the things that they do and are responsible for. We very much see accountability as this two-way street, and it's kind of key. And then lastly, of course, is collaboration. We've said it many times, but you have to be willing to and actually actively seeking out collaboration at all points. Something that we often say is there's no secrets in safety. You know, even us as being like Porter's Dash 8 flight ops management team, we do have these things where we collaborate even with other airlines, competing competitor airlines, where we share things from a safety perspective, because there are no secrets in safety.
Yeah, it benefits everyone.
It benefits literally everyone. Yeah. So those are some of the things that sort of stand out to me from, your more positive aspects of leadership. And some of those qualities have also been, have been a part of the incredible male leaders that I've had a privilege to work with over the years. I would say, yeah, irrespective of gender, those are the things that I'm looking for, the things that I place at pretty high priority.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me in my career, I found that the most effective leadership style isn't defined by a person's gender, but again, by their ability to manage a series of crucial balances. And I think Ginger touches on this a little bit, but the leaders I've admired are the ones who really master this. So they have confidence to delegate, but always take ultimate accountability. They give their team credit for the successes, but also shield them from blame during setbacks. And they know how to push you out of your comfort zone while making it clear that they're also there to support you, right? Those are things that often are held in tension with each other. So to answer your question about Porter, this is exactly what makes this leadership culture, especially under Liz, stand out. It's a living example of that kind of philosophy in action. So for instance, during our recent expansion, there's been this incredible like big picture vision, right? We're gonna get 100 jets and we're gonna fly them across North America. But a great idea is only as good as its implementation. So what makes it work is when leaders commit to ensuring that the team's equipped to follow through. We're open to feedback from the front line, and we focus on building the processes we need to succeed, not just handing out a plan and say, make it work, right? So for me, that's the leadership that truly stands out, one that combines ambitious vision with a practical support and a deep accountability. It builds trust and creates an environment where people feel safe to go and innovate and grow. And I just feel really fortunate to have that experience at Porter.
I did want to ask a little more of a personal question, but at any point throughout your careers, did either of you unfortunately face any discrimination with regards to your gender and being a female in this industry? Or has it all been typically positive and good energy?
No. Yeah, it hasn't all been positive, for sure. I would like to sit here and say that it has been, but it hasn't. That just wouldn't be honest. We wouldn't really be having a good faith conversation at that point. I've definitely experienced discrimination in terms of gender within this role. Everything on the very minor end, from being in full uniform and being mistaken as the flight attendant, or still being thought to be a pilot, but when you're a captain, or in my case, like an ECP or trainer, and you're sitting next to a first officer that happens to be male, they're assuming that the guy is the captain. Right? So things like that. Those are sort of on the minor end of things, but unfortunately, that still happens even currently. Mm-hmm. In the earlier phases of my career, though, they were more egregious. There were some deeply offensive comments, things that I won't even repeat here. This is actually just not even productive to the conversation, but deeply, deeply offensive from the perspective of questioning, should a woman even be a pilot? Like, I've been asked that in not so many words, in worse words. So yeah, it certainly exists. And years ago, even experiencing that from leaders, unfortunately, there were certain leaders who shared in those comments and thoughts. What is promising to me is that as each year goes by, that is less and less and less. And I look back and I'm able to see like the great strides that have been made in that area. Yeah, I'm just grateful that we're finally at a point where those really egregious things seem to be on the downturn, frequency-wise.
Do you think that it's less and less because you are in this leadership role where people are like, you're the big boss and, you can't talk to the boss like this? Or do you think that like even on a more minor level when it comes to new first officers, like it's getting better?
I think it's a couple things. So I do think it's seeing women in leadership roles and high up leadership roles, not necessarily just supervisory or middle management positions, but something higher, director and above. I think that's really important just from a visibility standpoint. I think that helps. I also think, though, that to your point about like new hires, that can happen in how you do your recruiting process. So recruiting new pilots, whether that be first officer or a direct entry captain, to work at your airline isn't just about the specific like technical skills and the requirements to be able to fly the plane. There is like a right fit for the job. And a lot of that does come down to, are you a fit with our culture? And because Porter and many other airlines have cultivated a culture where that is a thing that is very important to them, that hopefully we're actually hiring people that fit with the culture. So I do think that you also see less and less and less of that because you actually tend to make culture a priority when you're hiring people. So I do think it's more than one thing. Yeah.
What about you, Claire? Have you unfortunately ever faced any discrimination throughout your career? Or has your story been a little more positive?
I think we're really lucky to have had some really amazing women go before us to pave the way for women in aviation. It doesn't mean that we haven't had our own share of challenges, though. I think there's still conscious and unconscious bias in the aviation industry. It ranges from those innocent things, like Ginger was saying, to being mistaken for a flight attendant even when you're in full uniform, to more serious criticism and harassment. Yeah, say you know what, you're in for a treat when the conversation starts with something like, the problem with women pilots is... Okay, so rather than kind of rehash those kind of things, the question becomes, how am I going to respond to this, right? Over the years, developed a bit of a playbook, and it kind of comes down to three things: how you react in the moment, how you build your resilience, and how you work to change the culture, right? So first, in the moment, it's about choosing your battles. For a simple mistake, a calm professional, oh, I'm actually the captain, that might be all that's needed. For a more loaded comment, sometimes the most powerful response is a calm, curious question, maybe something like, what makes you say that? Yeah. Right? And it puts the onus back on them to explain their bias, and often they can't. Second, in terms of like long-term resilience, my focus has been on professional excellence. So the most effective response to doubt is competence. Often I focus on being the best pilot and leader I can be, and just as importantly, surround myself with a strong network of allies and mentors, and that means both men and women, right, who I can trust and lean on for support. And finally, I believe the most powerful response is to actively change the culture for women coming up behind us. So that's why things like the work that Northern Lights is doing is really important. By being visible, by mentoring, by showing up in leadership roles, we can slowly change the default image of what a pilot looks like. And we can make it easier for the next women to come, so they don't have to answer questions like this as often as we do. Yeah.
That's always a popular question that we like to ask, especially with the diversity of who we have on this podcast, because we do have some female that, are retired from this industry, but like you mentioned, they're a female that came before us. And so their stories are, much different. And it's always nice to hear the variety in perspectives of what everyone's gone through. Another question, a little more controversial, is, do you find that you've always noticed a sense of camaraderie amongst women in this industry? It is a topic that I've heard, at least from student female pilots, more on the low hour, low time side, where sometimes there might be a sense of competition between the two because of the fact that this industry isn't as diverse as it could be in terms of gender.
Yeah, I definitely feel a sense of camaraderie with fellow female aviators just in general. And I think my experience is that it is irrespective of your status within the industry. I find once you have that thing in common, oh, I am a female pilot, you are a female pilot, I find it doesn't even matter if you're talking to student, a rec pilot, retired airline captain, we're friends all of a sudden. Yeah, I just find that has been more my experience than anything else. And I think that the reason that it's so important to have that connection and to share in that is because the experience of being a female pilot, being in this very niche, unique position, is different, it's unusual, and it's challenging, right? And I think that because, the more time you spend in it, you'll have both good things and maybe some not so good things that you'll experience because of that. It just makes you naturally want to share, and I don't want to say commiserate, but a little bit commiserate in some of those more negative things. But being able to, share even in the negative experiences gives us a chance to develop, like what Claire was kind of alluding to in her answer there, which is, developing how do you deal with those things? How do you develop your playbook for when this person says this to you, right? Yeah, I've seen a lot of that type of sharing, and that helps. It's something I wish I had in the very early part of my career. I could have done with a little bit of that at the beginning. In the very early part of my career, I didn't really have enough of a sense of I felt very connected to just being a pilot, just in general, but didn't really see, or I didn't really understand the importance of kind of identifying with being a female pilot, a female aviator. And now just having a little bit of hindsight, having that distance, I wish that I had been able to have that support system at the beginning. For example, when I joined my diploma class at Moncton Flight College, we started with 32 people, 3 of which were women, 1 being myself. Now, we graduated with just 15 people. All 3 women graduated together. So something kind of incredible there from a percentage perspective. But yeah, certainly notice it when you walk into the classroom and you're like, oh, that's different. That is not a demographic I am used to coming right out of high school.
Yeah, my commercial ground school, I was the only woman in my class.
Wow.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, like, especially through organizations like Canadian Women in Aviation, Northern Lights, the 99s, like there is that kind of community that I also wish I had known about earlier but I'm really glad to be connected with now. I wanted to share a story of something that happened to me recently. I was talking to a bartender at an event, and I discovered that she was learning to fly. And she said that what she loved most about aviation was how supportive the women were of each other. And that was a level of collaboration that she hadn't found in other fields. And I thought it was really interesting. And hearing that from someone who was just entering the industry, to me, was a really powerful reminder of the community that we've built. And that kind of spirit is, I think, what inspires me to really like kind of pay it forward in the industry. In my role at Porter, I've had opportunities to speak at events like Girls Take Flight and give tours of the flight deck to women and girls and share my experience. I used to think that my goal with this kind of thing was to convince girls to be pilots, right? But I quickly realized that the real mission is to just ignite their curiosity, to know what's possible, right? To encourage them to find what they're passionate about and to pursue it wholeheartedly. And I think that kind of extends to our day-to-day leadership as well. My experience with mentorship has shown me that it's more than just a single point of contact, right? It's an opportunity to journey with someone through a extended period of time. So whether we're working with prospective pilots through our Destination Porter mentorship program or flying with new first officers or conducting check rides, we can see that through the same lens. It's not a chance to connect on a deeper level, to discuss people's dreams and fears, to provide support to them, when things don't work out as they might have planned, and also to celebrate their successes along the way. That kind of supportive connection, I think it's so characteristic of women in this industry, is exactly the kind of environment that we want to strive for in our day-to-day work.
I feel like more recently, all these communities have been building up and getting stronger and stronger to support women in aviation when they didn't really exist. Maybe even when you guys were starting your flight training early on.
Yeah, or things that have existed for a really long time that I wish that I had known about. Yeah. Like I'm on a board of directors for Canadian Women in Aviation. I'm sponsorship chair for that. That's new as of this year. CWIA, they're now officially filed as a nonprofit. And they've actually been around for so long. Oh, yeah. And I only knew about them within the last couple years, yeah. 5 years, maybe, something like that.
Because Porter was a sponsor and
exactly
went to yeah. And the 99s have been around since 1929, like almost 100 years, right? Yeah. And I didn't join until 2012. Yeah. I'd already been flying for a decade, and I wish I'd known about them earlier because they offer some really great scholarships.
Yeah. I only just joined a couple years ago, and I again wish that I had even known that this existed. Yeah. I would have been all over that from a research perspective. Yeah, they do great work, and I find that these groups, the ones that we're mentioning, all of them now, I think one of their big things is like to get more information out to the general public. I think they're all doing a really good job of that in the recent years to advertise it more, because that's even just the visibility is how you grow that community.
And this is why we do things like this, right? So we can get the word out a little bit more. A little backstep towards earlier in your education or in your training, what would you say to a young woman now who's starting flight training and now she faces some hardships and she's having a tough time? How did you guys find yourselves and stay motivated during that time to keep pursuing flight training, keep yourself in aviation?
That's a tough one. I definitely felt in the very early stages of being a flight instructor, it wasn't like a perfect trajectory. And there was definitely times where I was nearly losing steam with it. Like we've already talked about, but the industry was really slow and there weren't a lot of jobs, and instructing has its ups and downs for just work availability, for it being consistent. And I do remember a time, kind of a low point in instructing, just you don't have a lot of students, really bad weather sets in for a period of time. And I remember thinking someone I actually knew that I had gone to flight college with, she was not in my year, but she was in a different year. She had actually very briefly stopped being a pilot and was cabin crew overseas because she just, from a financial perspective, she just had to do that. And she was giving me information on it being like, well, it's something you can do. At least you get to stay in aviation and, you know, you're around planes and all these things, but it does pay a lot better. It's way more consistent. And there was a time, like a very, very brief moment where I was looking into it, but I remember talking to a fellow flight instructor. She's wonderful. We're still friends to this day. And she was just like, I think that would be a huge mistake. She's like, I know it's really tough right now. I know this is just like, it's a grind sometimes trying to get through this. But she's like, you just have to push through it. Let's talk about the problem. How can we solve it? Let's work through it. So when I kind of think about this hard time that I had at the beginning of my career, and I sort of think about that, really it's finding someone that you can talk to and lean on for advice. And that's the thing. And I know like sometimes we structure that as mentorship or that, you know, a more formal thing, but even something that's informal. It's huge. Like just having this like very assertive friend of mine who kind of like really sort of pushed me along to be like, no, please stay in this, don't leave, and don't just give up on this portion of what you want to do. It was huge. I did in fact push through that, and then here's where I sit today. Right? So like that's huge. That's all I needed was just a little nudge and to know that somebody was in the background supporting and to kind of hear the challenges that were present. But
kind of adding alongside that, in your leadership roles now, do you feel a responsibility to mentor women aspiring to similar positions in aviation? And how do you balance that mentorship with the operational demands of your position?
Yeah, I definitely feel a responsibility just given the position of our roles and what we do. I feel that it is a duty to mentor and be part of that community. I feel very strongly about encouraging Porter as a whole to be part of those types of events. So we've talked about it a little bit, but Destination Porter is with a sort of an early connections program and a mentorship program that we have that I feel very strongly about being involved with. And then, of course, we have some involvement with Girls Can Fly, Girls Take Flight, and Northern Lights, of course, is Nines. Yeah, exactly. And we've been a sponsor of CWIA. And then on my own time, I said, I'm also on the board for CWIA as well, which is something I just started this year. But the reason I really wanted to do it was because I so aligned with what it's all about and what their goals are. And it just happens to be a passion of mine. The thing is that to answer your question about how do you balance that with the other things that you're doing, you have to balance it. It is time management. Like at this end of the career, there's a lot going on. Yeah, I can definitely admit that, you know, I'm a pretty busy person. Generally, we both are busy people, generally speaking. But when you think about, okay, well, this thing is really important to me, so you make time. You find the time, you schedule it, you figure out how you're going to make that work, and also look at it realistically and say, like, what can I realistically devote to this, you know, side project, this thing that's outside of work. That's what I did when I was thinking about, you know, getting more involved with CWIA. Actually, I talked about this with Claire about, you know, how do I balance what we're doing at work and what our responsibilities are with something that I want to do. But yeah, you find the time, you make the time because it's important. The other thing is that it's also really enjoyable. So so that when you do finally make the time and you make this thing work, you're kind of in the events in the moment. You go, well, this is actually just really fun. So I'm glad that I've prioritized this in my spare time, and you just make it a thing. I'll say that just time management in general for any leader is something that it's a skill. Mm-hmm. You have to develop that. It doesn't necessarily come naturally to every single person, and you have to work at it.
for me, like mentorship it happened informally and formally. It was through Destination Porter, through the 99s. I have mentees who I've been connected with since pre-COVID, like 2019, and it's been great to see them like grow and develop in their careers, right? And to experience some of those setbacks and then come back from them, you know, just with the challenges that the pandemic provided in terms of flight training, in terms of like first jobs, that kind of thing. And I'm so proud of them when they like take that next step, or like a couple of them have come to Porter and, you know, to get a text to me like, I passed my line check, right? And I'm like so happy, and it's so rewarding. And they're like, they're long lasting friendships, really, you know, and to see someone grow and develop in their career, I think like, yeah, of course I want to be involved in that, right? Sometimes it's, you know, quick text here and there. Sometimes it's like, I got a text, hey, can we talk on the phone? I really have some questions about an interview I have coming up, or about, you know, how to manage, you know, something on the line with flying and that kind of thing. And I find that sometimes I have good ideas and feedback and stuff. And sometimes I'm not 100% sure. And I think, okay, who else would I know who could help this person, right? And I actually reached out to Liz once and I said, hey, do you know anyone who I could kind of point them in the right direction? She's like, absolutely, here's someone they could talk to. And we made that connection with another pilot who was able to provide just that bit more information and got the person set up and on their way. And it was like having that network of people around you you can like a community really to support each other is, you know, really nice.
That is great. Well, looking ahead to kind of leave everyone on a more positive note with your leadership at Porter, how do you see the role of women in aviation evolving over the next decade, and just some of the maybe projects or things that you guys are excited about and how Porter might be able to help achieve this in this industry?
Where I see sort of the industry going is that we've said this in a couple of our answers, but, you know, women in general have made such strides for the right to and our presence in aviation. I feel that now is definitely not the time for complacency with this effort, and we just need to keep that momentum going. And what we need to do from specifics is to encourage leaders who are in high-level positions to advocate for mentorship programs, for outreach, for collaboration, which means, again, like what we've talked about, it's a choice. You have to choose to do that and put the effort into making that a goal. It's an investment. Absolutely. I think leaders have this key role in ensuring that their organization-led programs are maintained through planning and funding. It is intentional. These things don't just happen on no budget either. Like, it's great for us to say, like, we volunteer and we like volunteering, and we do. But from an organization's perspective, like, they really actually have to put some real like planning and funding behind that to get those programs running and to keep them running. These types of mentorship programs, like they stay alive because of the efforts of leaders and the participants to basically understand like the value and just what everybody gets out of them.
Yeah, I mean, we think about the future, it's pretty optimistic, right? I think the last generation of women fought so hard for presence, like that right to be in the flight deck, in the boardroom, in the hangar. And because of them, this like kind of next decade is about influence, right? How do we use that presence? So it's not just about having more women, it's about how we fundamentally shape our policies, our culture, our leadership styles in this industry. We'll see more collaborative leadership, I think, greater focus on work-life integration that benefits everyone, and a deeper, more ingrained culture of mentorship. But as Ginger said, this evolution isn't guaranteed, right? It needs to be intentional. So here's a couple things we can do. We need to create clear pathways. We can't leave mentorship to chance. Leaders need to build formal, structured programs for mentorship and sponsorship to intentionally guide the next generation of women into leadership roles. It's about building a ladder, not just hoping that people find it, right? We have to really be intentional about it. The next thing would be to modernize our policies, reevaluate things like parental leave, flexible scheduling, return to work programs after medical leave. These aren't women's issues per se. They're industry-wide talent retention issues, people issues. Yeah. And I think the organizations that solve these challenges will attract and keep the best people, right? And then the last thing is that cultivation of a culture of trust. So I think this is probably the most critical one. It's about intentionally creating an environment where people feel safe to be vulnerable, to speak up, to bring their authentic selves to work. I think I've learned in my journey that when a leader cultivates a culture of deep trust, that's when the team truly shines and does its best work. And I think so by doing these things, we don't just help women succeed. We build a stronger, more resilient, more innovative aviation industry for everyone.
One thing that I really do appreciate about Porter is the gender culture at that company. I think many airlines are doing a great job, but I think that Porter stands out. And I think I'm not speaking just for myself, but a lot of women at at Seneca, right, where I studied. And that's one thing that we've always seen and we've always talked to pilots that are at Porter. And it's just, being a mom, being a single mom, being, a newlywed, it's just such a, the culture there really does support whatever you're going through or whatever situation you're at in life. And I think that that's something that a lot of different airliners, and not just 705s, like 703, 704 operations should strive to work towards. So I think those are really important messages for leaders, not only in that airline setting, but leaders generally within the industry. So I think that's really amazing.
We get the question a lot, especially when we do events with Destination Porter. And I do a lot of this year, especially, I did a lot of traveling and a lot of outreach with Destination Porter to schools that we don't normally get to do a lot with. So on the West Coast, which was really nice. Mm-hmm. And a question that I get every single time without fail, every time, is, why have you stayed at Porter so long? I'm in my 12th year. And you'll find a lot of us, yes, we have a lot of newer team members. We have a lot of people, we have a ton of pilots at Porter who are very tenured.
Some people have been here since the beginning of the airline.
Exactly. Literally day one, class one. We have some class one individuals. And the response that I think all of us say, and because it's actually just true, is that it's the people that you work with. It just makes it easy to stay.
We like who we fly with.
Yeah, you gotta like who you fly with. Yeah.
And Ginger, for yourself, as Porter's new chief pilot, what are you most excited about in your new role? For listeners who may be approaching a major milestone or stepping into a leadership position, what advice would you offer as they prepare to take that leap?
Lately in this role, I'm most excited about our pilot group's renewed effort to maintaining standards and renewed technical excellence. So I do feel I have to explain this one a little bit. Porter has generally been known as an airline with a very strict training program. I think that's not really a secret. We have very high standards and we have really high adherence to SOPs. And truly at our company, saying safety is first is not just a statement. It is true. It is ingrained in the culture. However, we've been talking about this, here in this conversation, that the dynamics of the industry have changed so drastically in the last, especially 5 years, that, we've already alluded to this, but we really had to maintain the high level, the high standards that we have, the high training standards and SOPs and things that we have at our company. We very much needed to change our approach to training. We had to very much tailor that for a group that might not have had multi-crew experience, especially not real-world IFR experience. We'd always previously said at Porter, even when I joined the company, it was well, you need to come with IFR and multi-crew because we can teach you the plane, but we're not going to teach you those things. And that's sort of true, but I actually find we're separating ourselves from that idea now, it's kind of nice to think that we are separating ourselves from that, because just because a person doesn't come with previous multi-crew experience or previous real-world IFR experience doesn't mean that they can't do this role and do it well. But that actually has to start with us as a company. We have an assistant chief pilot of training. Of course, he's not here with us today, but Josh Bricker is his name. And he has just the things that he's accomplished within our training programs are quite incredible. Of course, the training at Porter has changed so dramatically from when I joined to what it is like today. But even just in the time that Josh has been in his role, he's just changed it for the positive. He has this way of really understanding the needs of the group that is currently available. He's just one of his skills. He's just really good at that. I'm happy that we're talking about it, but yeah, it's something that I think to stay current with the industry the way that it is, operators just need to understand that it's changed. Yeah, they need to go with it. Yeah, they need to embrace it, I should say. My advice for somebody stepping into a new leadership role where you're taking on more responsibilities, this is something I've actually learned from Josh, so this is partly when I want to bring this up too, is to be honest with yourself and your friends and your family about the level of time commitment that it takes to acclimatize to this new role, whatever that role is. Something that I hear Josh telling our new pilots literally all the time is tell your family, tell your friends, tell your spouse, your significant other, tell anybody, your immediate sphere, guys, I'm sorry, this is my role for the next, 3 to 4 months, and don't be afraid to ask for help in that time span, to say like, I actually need some help taking away from things that I might regularly do at home. Right now, I actually just have to admit to myself that I only have time for this one thing. Josh is really good at giving people that kind of like professional and personal advice to our new pilots. And, I heard him say it so many times in interviews and in new classes that it's something that I started really taking to heart and for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I took on the new role as chief pilot, I was very much remembering what he tells people. And I'm like, okay, yeah, actually, I have to do that. Like I was talking to myself, you have to do that. And so I did have to have those conversations with my significant other, my family, to just be like, right now, I'm going to need some time to adjust. And that's okay.
Yeah, I did the same thing when I was studying for my ACP. Yeah. I was realizing that I was just trying to do so many things myself. Yeah. And I eventually one day said to my partner, like, you need to take on some more of the chores, this for the next month or two, because I am in like full study mode and this is so important to me. And they're really supportive of that, right? But you need to ask for the help. Yeah. People sometimes don't realize how much effort goes in outside of work hours, even to do some of the work that we do.
Yeah, two of the biggest things that we tackled, ACP, and then of course going into chief pilot for me, it was just, they were bigger things, but it's a mindset. Switching to that mindset and
kind of study mode.
Yeah, study mode. Like, it's not just the studying and the technical aspect and the knowledge portion. It's there's this other softer skill to that. Right? It's a good thing to bring up with people.
Does it get easier afterwards? Like after these exams are done and after you've adopted the role, does it get easier to lead in those positions?
It does. I think it does. I think that because you've made that space and you've almost like you've had that conversation with yourself, that it is, once you get through that sort of immediate difficult time period, that acclimatization or the changing point, once you're past that, it is so much easier on the other end. You all of a sudden feel you're not just like up to your neck with the water level. You're very much like swimming comfortably, if that works for an analogy. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Do you guys find that you have a lot of free time and like personal time outside of work, outside of leadership, outside of CWIA and 99s and all of this to kind of live your life and enjoy your life?
It would be very easy to get like just full into work mode all the time, but it is necessary to have personal time to be able to continue doing good work, I think. So it means intentionally carving out that time. For me, I need more structured activities, I would say. Like, I can't just be like, oh, I'll do something fun later. I need like, okay, I go to choir every Thursday night, and that is my time for my choir rehearsal, right? And then in the summers when choir's not on, I do dragon boating on Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings, right? Like, I have very intentional time set aside to do my like fun things. Yeah.
For me, it's traveling. This year, I would say I have a renewed focus on carving out some actual days to spend some time traveling and going away with my husband, and it's just something we enjoy. Also, we're crazy Disney fans. We spend a lot of time at the Disney parks when I can get some downtime, and it's just a thing that we like to do. Yeah, it's important to actually take the time that you need to have some real time away from work.
To detach from work a little bit, because I find that traveling, like, it's usually when I'm on the plane on the way back, I'm thinking about work, but in a different way. It's not of like all the stuff I have to do. It's like you think of it in like what opportunities are there? What could I do differently? I come back like feeling a bit more refreshed and like ready to take on the next challenge.
Yeah. And like I completely agree with what Claire is saying here. Like I've been on a vacation away somewhere and I've had a thought for, hey, we should do this. We could change this program just a little bit. It was you and I on a plane very recently where we were talking about our manager on duty program and some tweaks that we could make to that. So that separation though gives you that time to be able to rest adequately, to be able to come to the table like really prepared.
Yeah, maybe
to do the work.
Slightly different perspective, right?
Yeah.
On a bit of a different note, Claire, you've been incredibly open about your own cancer journey, a reality that many people in aviation beyond quietly face. What has it been like to navigate such a personal challenge, but continue to lead in this industry? I think that this is an important question because there is a big stigma around medical health, especially as a pilot. So I think something like this, especially if there is a listener out there that might be going through a medical journey, what are some words of wisdom that you might have for them?
I was first diagnosed with breast cancer at the end of 2022. My initial instinct was to be very private about it. I was really heartbroken because I wouldn't be flying, especially we'd just gotten back into the rhythm of things after the pandemic. But the community around me wouldn't let me go through it alone. And I'm really thankful for that. I started writing monthly updates for friends and family. And since I couldn't travel, I asked them to send me postcards. And my mailbox was flooded with hundreds of postcards from all over the world. And that outpouring of support was just the first turning point. It reminded me that I wasn't isolated. The second turning point came, I would say, out of frustration. The healthcare system isn't really equipped to deal with cancer in young adults. And I had a very difficult time getting a diagnosis. As a result, I felt this growing responsibility to use my experience to educate others and advocate for change. That's when my private journey started to merge with my public role. So I got involved in Porter's Fly Pink campaign. This is what we do in October to raise funds for breast cancer research. And it moves us beyond awareness into action, right? I started working with some really incredible organizations. One day I was at Queen's Park in Toronto with an organization called Rethink Breast Cancer, and we were advocating for better drug approval processes. And then another time I was participating in a research study with Young Adult Cancer Canada. I even had a poem and a couple essays about my experience published in a magazine called Wildfire. What has been so profound for me is seeing the real world impact of being open about this. I've had other women in the industry approach me and share their own health concerns that have been dismissed maybe because they were quote unquote too young. And I've been able to point them to some resources and encourage them to advocate for themselves in getting the care that they need. So I think to answer your question, navigating this has fundamentally changed me as a leader. It's taught me that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a bridge. Sharing my story has helped create connections that I could never have imagined and showed me that a leader's real strength isn't in being invincible, but in creating a safe space for the tough human conversations to happen.
You mentioned that the health culture dealing with this is a little difficult. What about more on the medical side of aviation and getting back into flying? Are you still flying now? How does that kind of work?
I am flying again, but I'll tell you, the first thing I would say is you have to find a balance between being patient with the process and being fiercely persistent in advocating for yourself. When I was diagnosed, I was swept into this like medical tornado of tests and specialists, and at first I felt like I was just a passenger along for the ride. The turning point came when I was facing a major surgical decision, and the options presented just didn't quite feel right for me. My only priority at that point was getting back into the air, and some of those options would require a very long time for recovery, sometimes multiple surgeries. So I did my own research. I found an incredible community of women online who had made, different choices, and they helped me find the right questions to ask. I walked into my next meeting with my surgeon armed with knowledge, right? And I went from being a passenger to being a part of the crew in terms of advocating for the treatment plan that I wanted. That lesson was just as crucial when it came to my career. So after 18 months of, it was about 9 months of treatment. And then a couple more months after that, my doctor gave me the all clear to get back into flying. And then from that point, it was another 9 months, just as long as I was in treatment. I was out of treatment and just dealing with the bureaucracy of Transport Canada, really. A lot of persistence to navigate that to get my medical back. So in total, I was grounded for 595 days. But who's counting? I was counting. There was so many times where I felt like, oh my goodness, am I falling through the cracks of the system again? Right? So my advice is this, I guess. Arm yourself with knowledge, find your community because they are out there, they will support you. And most importantly, choose to be an active member of your crew, right? In terms of that treatment. I kept coming back to this quote from Amelia Earhart that said, the most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. So whether you're in a hospital room or dealing with paperwork, making that decision to act, to ask questions, to make the calls, to advocate for the path that's right for you, that is what will eventually get you back into the flight deck.
It seems like you really went through a large journey there to get yourself back into the flight deck, and it's not very easy. That probably made you grow a lot as a person. And
yeah, so I was completely off work for about 9 months, or no, almost a year, and then came back to my management role, but in a not flying, right? And just kind of was like, okay, I'm back in my job, but I just need to do it a little bit differently. And I got into doing a lot more training in the simulator, which helped me like keep connected to our SOPs and what was going on in the line, and working to amend manuals and that kind of thing. So there's always work to be done, but always having that end goal of like, this is not it. Like I need to get to that next step of getting back into the flight deck. And it, as I said, took a lot of persistence, but it felt so good when it actually happened.
No, it is really inspiring. And we even know a few peers like at, the minor level that have gone through health issues. And again, with this industry, like at least with Transport Canada, there's certain things that just do not fly. And it's just the process is so long and lengthy and whatnot. So I think it's inspiring to show. And not only that, but your courage to go and do research when you weren't asked to do it. Like that was something that you had to figure out on your own. And there are probably people that might not understand that and might not understand the healthcare system. They may not speak the language, right? Or understand the culture behind that. So I think that that's also an important encouragement for everyone out there.
Yeah. And even doctors who are maybe like amazing in their field, but they don't even necessarily understand the nuance of getting you back to work in a flying capacity.
Yeah, Transport Canada asked me for some additional tests, and my specialist was like, well, those aren't medically necessary, though. I'm like, maybe not, but they're necessary for me, for my career, right? And so having to go back and to advocate for that was important.
I've dealt with a much shorter, like a medical issue myself years ago. I've been pretty open about sharing about the event itself. The actual medical event itself was short, really short. The getting back online, especially the portion with Transport Canada and doctors and their requirements, was very lengthy. From if you're talking about, the event was really a 2 to 3 day thing, and the time back, it took 6 months to prove to Transport that it was okay to come back to flying.
So it's a lot of times it's about like, there's a process. We understand that. And then just kind of like following up, checking in. Remember me?
Yeah. And finding an advocate too. Like I found with I don't know if you had this, Claire, but with mine, one of my former civil aviation medical examiners, he was really instrumental in being like, okay, we have to get you back online. He's like, I think he used the word ridiculous more than once. And he was like, we will find a way. Whatever tests they require, we'll do it. We'll make recommendations. We'll go through those hoops because it's worth it.
Yeah. I mean, when you have something that you're as passionate about as aviation as we are, then yeah, you find a way.
But not to negate like that community that, you still have to disclose certain things. And like, even though this process is so lengthy, it discourages a lot of open discussion about, even like the mental health community, right? When it comes to aviation, that's such a new niche topic that is being highlighted a little more these days. But things like that, and like, your story, Claire, and your story, Ginger, and just these experiences getting out there and encouraging others to kind of, rise up a little more and hopefully inspire change. And hopefully in the future, this whole process with medicals and paperwork and admin with transport can flow better, right? No, but thanks for sharing that, you two.
That's true, right? This is like the first step, is just generating awareness so people understand what's going on and that it's not impossible, that you can get through it and still make it to where you guys are now.
It's been great to learn a little bit about your journeys, and we're excited to see where the company goes in the future. So just once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedules and helping inspire the younger generation to come forward.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This was just a great conversation. We're really happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much.
And to our listeners, we wish you all blue skies and tailwinds ahead. We'll catch you next time for the next episode of the Blue Skies Podcast.